Hey everybody, welcome to your Kingdom Animalia video notes. Before we get started though, another quick refresher on cell organelles. So you should by now be familiar with an animal cell and all the important organelles, but if I were you, I'd pause here for a minute and just reread through all of the organelles. Cell respiration, another topic you should be familiar with. So remember that when we start with glycolysis, we always start there. If oxygen is present, we go to Krebs. And then electron transport, which produces the most ATP. And if oxygen is not present, we go to fermentation. So what is an animal? An animal is simply this. It's a multicellular eukaryotic heterotroph whose cells lack cell walls. So how are they classified? Two ways. We have invertebrates and vertebrates. So invertebrates do not have a backbone. They're 95% of all animals, things like insects, worms, jellyfish, sea stars. Vertebrates, on the other hand, have a backbone, and this is 5% of animals, so fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. When we talk about body support, there's also a difference between invertebrates and vertebrates. So invertebrates have something called an exoskeleton. So this is that hard, tough outer covering, the reasons why like bugs crunch when you step on them. And vertebrates, on the other hand, like us, we have endoskeletons. So this supports the body, but it also provides an internal brace for muscles. Movement is also different among the animal kingdom. So animals that are considered mobile are those that can move. They use fins or feet or legs or wings. But there's also animals that are sessile, that during their adult life, they cannot move. They're stationary, much like the sea anemone that you see here. In terms of body plans, there is something called symmetry that you need to be familiar with, which is just how the body can be divided on a plane. And there's three different kinds. So we have asymmetry, like the sponge here. They're not symmetrical no matter which way you slice them. They're not going to be the same on both sides. Then we have radial symmetry, which is like a jellyfish or a sea anemone. It's something that you can cut it any direction and it's going to be equal on both sides. And then lastly, we have bilateral symmetry, like the hummingbird, like us, like many other organisms that you can only divide like right down the middle and you get two mostly equal halves. That would be bilateral symmetry. Another phrase that goes along with symmetry is a term called cephalization. So cephalization itself is the concentration of nerve endings in the head region. Now this is only common, or even period, exists in advanced vertebrates or invertebrates that have bilateral symmetry. So if we look at this diagram here, these animals like a hydra, which is a type of jellyfish in the jellyfish family, or a sea star, they really don't have a brain or a concentrated nerve area at the end. They also don't have bilateral symmetry. But you look here at a flatworm, a leech, an insect, they all have that concentrated nerve ending in their brain, leading to cephalization. So let's quiz. What type of symmetry? This is radial. This one, bilateral. You can only split down the middle. Remember, sponges are asymmetry. No matter how you cut that, even if it kind of looks symmetrical, it is not. Once again, right down the middle, right? Bilateral. And this one, this is kind of tricky. This is actually radial. So you could divide this way, this way, this way, this way, or this way, and it's still going to be equal on all sides. Now that we've talked about symmetry and divisions, let's talk about anatomical directions. So there are four major terms that I expect you to know. They are dorsal, ventral, anterior, or you may see the word cranial, and then posterior or caudal. So dorsal, this one's pretty simple. Think about the back, right? Like a dorsal fin on a whale, or when you see a shark coming through the water, that's the dorsal or the back. Ventral, on the other hand, is the opposite of dorsal, so it's the belly. It's your smooth surface on an alligator's belly, for example. And then anterior or cranial is the head or the front end of the animal, and then posterior or caudal is the tail or hind end. And an easy way to remember that too, a caudal fin on a fish or a shark or a whale or a dolphin, that is their tail fin that helps them swim. So So let's go back and revisit homeostasis. So homeostasis itself means the ability to maintain a constant internal environment. So there are ways that animals have to do this, and there's two types of ways of regulating body temperature to maintain this homeostasis. So we have endotherms and ectotherms. So endo, prefix endo, inside. So this is an organism that maintains its internal body temperature by making its own body heat like we do, or like this polar bear does here. And then we also have an ectotherm, which this is like reptiles, like Zima. They rely on interactions with their environment to control body temperature. As they get cooler, they lose energy, they can't move as quickly, and when they're warm, they're very, very mobile. Now, in terms of reproduction, there are two reproductive organs you should be aware of. So the male sex cell is a sperm, female sex cell is an egg. You should know this from meiosis. And then a fertilized female egg is a zygote. So hermaphrodite may or may not be a new term to you, but this is the name of an organism that produces egg and sperm in the same body. So they have male and female organs. A really good example of a hermaphroditic organism is an earthworm. Now, the ones that are not hermaphrodites still have to do fertilization. So they can do that through either internal or external. So internal is just that. The sperm and egg combine inside the body. This is what you typically think of when you think of animals mating, right? External, on the other hand, is a little bit different because the sperm and egg have to combine outside of the animal's body. The key here is it must have an aquatic environment. So if we look at this diagram over here, you see the female is laying her eggs in the water, and then the male fish is actually going to swim over and drop his sperm over the eggs, and the sperm will fertilize the eggs outside of the body on whatever body of water they are on the bottom, and then from there they will start developing. So for body tissues, there's also three terms of tissues you need to know. So an ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm. So ecto, once again, those prefixes, right? Ecto is outside. This is your outer layer of cells. It forms your nervous tissue in your skin. Meso, think meso or middle. This is in between ecto and endoderm. This is muscle, circulatory, and excretory system. And then your endoderm, endo, in, is your inner layer of cells, and this is what forms your digestive organs. In terms of body plans, so those tissues develop into different body plans. There are three types. So first of all, learn how to say the C part. So coelomate is how we say it. So kind of the O is silent in the first part, coelomate. So you can be acoelomate, pseudocoelomate, or coelomate. You may also see eucoelomate for that one, but acoelomate simply means that without a cavity. So these animals have a solid body, they don't have a circulatory system, and a really good example of an acoelomate organism is a flatworm. Pseudocoelomates, the prefix pseudo means false, so this just means false cavity. So they kind of have a cavity, but it doesn't quite have the capability of a true body cavity. So this is fluid-filled, which does limit organ development, and a good example is a roundworm, and you can kind of see what that looks like there. And lastly, a coelomate, which just means true cavity. This is why animals have organs and organ systems. It's formed from the mesoderm, which we just talked about, right, is the middle. And this is in things like insects, fish, and of course, you. So a little bit more about that in terms of developing. When a zygote is developing, there's an opening that forms. Well, there's two types of organisms based on what that opening becomes. So there's protostomes, and protostomes, that opening becomes their mouth. If they have an anus, not all animals do, it will develop later. Us, we're deuterostomes, just like sea cucumbers and starfish actually. We have, our opening becomes the anus, and then our mouth will develop later. The final topic I want to go over with animals with you is metamorphosis. So metamorphosis is probably something you're familiar with from elementary school, thinking about a caterpillar becoming a butterfly, but this is just a series of changes that an organism undergoes during development. And now both of my examples here are insects, but frogs, for example, also undergo metamorphosis as a tadpole becomes an adult. So the first kind is incomplete, and that's pictured right here with this picture. So there's only three stages in incomplete. You have an egg, then you have a nymph, which looks like a baby, like a little miniature replica of an adult, and then you have an adult. And an example here would be a grasshopper. The other kind is complete. In complete, there are 4 stages. So once again, we start with an egg. This time you have a larva, which is typically your caterpillar, and the larva makes a pupa or a cocoon. So you see that in this image here, which then becomes your adult. Butterflies, moths, they all go through complete metamorphosis. And that is it for your video note.